Hi guys, welcome back to another fun DIY video here about good old Athena. If you're not familiar with Athena, she's a 38-foot sailboat that I'm in the middle of doing a somewhat extensive refit on, and all of those efforts I document right here on YouTube. Over the last couple of weeks I've removed the engine and the sail drive, I've cut up an old diesel tank to get it out of the engine compartment, and then finally last weekend I dropped the rudder. And that means I'm finally ready to start rebuilding the engine compartment. Well, I say I'm ready to start rebuilding, but there is still the small matter of a tiny piece of rotten plywood in there I need to deal with. This is an 18mm piece of plywood, and I've got plenty of 18mm plywood left over from this summer when I replaced the core in the entire deck. When I first found the little bit of rut that's over here, some of you guys suggested I should just cut out this bit and just leave the plywood in place. But I think the proper fix here is to replace this entire piece of plywood. And with the rudder out of here, it shouldn't be too difficult to remove this piece of plywood. Well, that is to say, if I can remove this doohickey. I'm sure this thing has a proper name, maybe something like upper rudder bearing or something like that. But for now, that's not important. This is just about seeing if I can replace this little piece of plywood. Although if this is anything, it is probably a bushing rather than a bearing. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm glad I started poking around here, because as soon as I removed this clip here, what I'm assuming was once a seal just came crumbling out of there. Yeah, this thing is definitely not in good shape. We are pretty far above the waterline here, but it's probably a good idea to have something that seals in here anyways. Now, as far as removing this thing here, I am basically at a loss. I mean, it had to have been put on there after this piece of plywood was put in place. So there's got to be some way of removing it. It's a few days later. Fun little side note. I could not figure out how to get that stupid thing off of there. I spent hours scratching my head, gently tapping it with a hammer, trying to pry it out of there with a crowbar. I could not get that thing to move. Then a buddy of mine from the marina suggested that it might be screwed on. Ta-da! After cutting away a small section of plywood, it turned out that was exactly what was going on. Anywho, I cut away some more plywood to be able to get a good grip on the thing, and to my great surprise, the thing came off without any effort at all. And here it is in all its glory, soaking in some of this caramba stuff to get some of the grime off of it. The reason I couldn't turn this before I removed the plywood is pretty simple. The yard, in all their infinite wisdom, decided to lay up glass on this piece of plywood after this doohickey was bolted in place, meaning this was kind of flush mounted in there inside a groove of fiberglass. I think that goes a long ways towards explaining the current state of this piece of plywood. I will do a much better job of sealing up the new plywood. The way this was mounted, I am certain no one has ever replaced the Delrin bushing that sits immediately below this, just as with the seal up around the top here, and I'm definitely going to replace both of those. I'll have this thing looking brand new in no time. I'm a little pressed for time tonight, so let's hurry up. I've already sanded away most of the fiberglass, so this piece is now pretty flexible, but there is still the matter of the bottom layer of fiberglass down below this, but I think I can get to that with my oscillating multi-tool. I am pleased I got this thing out of here in one piece, because that means I can go ahead and use this as a template for the new piece of plywood. And wouldn't you know it, I've got plenty of plywood right here, although it is starting to be a little bit cramped in here. It is just a matter of lining this up, tracing an outline, and then cutting it out. I'm gonna go ahead and call that a nice snug fit. There is still the small matter of the hole in the middle, and because I ruined that area on the original piece of plywood, I can't use that as a template, so I'm gonna have to figure something out. Now, I'm not sure everything in here is 90 degrees, so I'm just gonna use these as a rough guide. Considering the limited amount of time I've got for digging around with this tonight, I am just gonna go ahead and drill a hole that is a few millimeters bigger than I actually need, and then that is gonna be it. Now that is just a dry fit, so if it looks a little crooked, that's why, but I'm gonna go ahead and call that a win. And this is what I've got so far. It's not pretty, but it'll get there. And I'm just gonna go ahead and round over these edges here because it's a lot easier for me to seal something that has a radius on it compared to a sharp edge. I've just done another little test fit and figured out that the doohickey here is going to be placed roughly here, so I can go ahead and drill some oversized holes. This thing is slowly but surely starting to take shape. I've sanded it, I've rounded over the corners, it's starting to feel really nice, and I've started taping over these holes to fill them with, yes, you guessed it. To this, I am going to add some 406 and a little bit of chopped up fiberglass. Good morning, guys. It is a few days later, also known as Saturday morning. My battery ran out of juice while I was filming that piece of plywood, so I didn't get to show you guys me applying the epoxy, but that's okay, you've seen that before. Let's head down below and take a look at that piece of plywood. And here it is in all its glory. As you can see, I've filled the oversized holes with thickened epoxy, and I've got a couple of coats of epoxy on the entire piece of plywood. Considering all the sanding I've done, 2 coats of epoxy might not be enough to make an effective moisture barrier, but this is also gonna get 3 coats of Sigma Cover 280, which is a 2-part epoxy primer, and then 3 coats of Sigma Dur 550 as a top coat. Of course, I can't start to apply the epoxy primer before I've tabbed this in place, which is why I've only got the epoxy on here now. But once I've got the 2 coats of epoxy on here, the 3 coats of primer, and the 3 coats of top coat, this thing is never, ever gonna rot again. Sure, you might argue that it's overkill for me to do this on a piece of plywood that's never gonna get submerged, or, well, at least if this gets submerged, I'm gonna have way bigger problems. For me to do what I'm doing here is just a few dollars extra for some epoxy and a little bit of extra paint compared to just haphazardly slapping on a single coat of some kind of mystery paint and calling it a day. And I think that is easily worth it, just for the peace of mind. This thing is ready to be put back into the engine compartment, but there is still a tiny bit of glorious, glorious sanding to do in the engine compartment. Ta-da! A big box of these newfangled M480 nets for sanding in 80 grit. I was so impressed by the small sample of these Bosch sent me that I went out and bought these with my own money. I think these are gonna last me a good long time, but we'll see. Before I head into the engine compartment, let's just open one more box. Contrary to what some comments seem to apply, I do actually care about my health. I'm just not a fanatic about it, but as you can see, these are P3, so these are perfectly okay to use. And I've got this 6000 series 3M mask. I got this primarily because it's a lot more comfortable to wear than the paper doohickeys. And also you can put on different filters on these depending on what you're doing. So for instance, if you're using a paint with solvents in it, you might use something like this filter. Or if you're just doing dusty work, you might use something like this. So now we are finally ready to head into the engine compartment. That was a complete and utter joy. I've finished sanding both sides, and I gotta say, this 150 turbo continues to be awesome. So yeah, we should be ready to glass that new piece of plywood in place. Now, I'm not just saying that this thing is awesome because I got it free of charge. I am genuinely a little bit annoyed with myself over not picking up one of these sooner. I know a lot of you guys recommended I do so, but I guess you live, you learn. I've cut all the fiberglass I think I need. Now if I need a little bit more than this, it's not going to be an issue because it's still pretty cold here, so working time is not going to be an issue. Before I get busy in here in the engine compartment, I just wanted to show you guys this little blob of thickened epoxy here. When I removed the plywood that I'm going to replace later today, there was a little dot here, like a little black dot. When I started scratching at the surface, it turned out that the plywood was rotten within, but it was just one ply, and it was luckily limited to a rather small area. Now, I've heard about that before, plywood rotting from the inside. I've just never seen it before. I sanded enough away to get to healthy plywood, and then I kept sanding a little bit more just to make sure, and then I faired the surface. Why not just go ahead and replace this entire piece of plywood, you might ask? Well, I would love to do that, but that would require me to take apart most of the aft cabin in here, most of the locker here behind me, and the companionway. That is a lot of work. And I am gonna seal all of this up, so I doubt there's gonna be any future issues with the rut in this area. It took a lot of fiddling around, but I think I've finally got everything lined up. I've had to support the plywood from underneath, so tapping it to the existing structure is gonna have to be a 2-day job. As always, it's the stupid prep work that takes just about forever. Let's hurry up and put down some fillets, and those of course are going to be 406 and 105. A little dab will do you, and I think in this case 2 pumps is going to be enough. To make a nice fillet is surprisingly easy. You just need some way of piping the epoxy into the 90-degree corner. And I'm going to use this plastic bag and a trick that my mom taught me as a kid when frosting cakes. Just get all your thickened epoxy into the bag and snip off a corner. There we go. And then it's just a matter of piping the epoxy into the corner. And don't worry if you get a little too much in there, because you're going to smooth it out with a spoon afterwards. I've just gone ahead and cleaned up the excess, and that, to me, looks like a perfectly acceptable fillet. And here is another one. As you can see, I've gone ahead and applied a little bit of unthickened epoxy to the wood before putting down the fillet. I've got all of my fiberglass cut, so let's go ahead and warm up some epoxy. Here I've got 5 pumps of epoxy, and as you can see, it's pretty thick because it's cold. So I want to heat it up so that I can easily wet out the fiberglass. Here I've got some warm water, and this is another trick I picked up making cakes with my mom as a kid, so that's certainly time well spent. And then we're just gonna heat the epoxy. Whoops, I need to leave for a non-boat related thing in about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna go ahead and lay up that fiberglass and I can show you guys what it looks like tomorrow. Good morning, guys. It is Sunday morning. I've been at it a little while, so come on down and I'll show you. This is what the tapping looked like earlier this morning when I got to the boat, and after a bit of glorious sanding, this is what they look like now. They are nice and smooth. There are no pokey bits to poke your fingers on. So now all I need to do is just to repeat that process on this top edge here, and I'll be done. There's also the matter of the inside or bottom edge of this, but I'm going to hold off on doing that until I have thoroughly dried out this area right down here by the limber hole and glassed in a small plastic tube. I want to make absolutely sure that no water seeps into that plywood through that little limber hole in the future, so that's why I'm putting in that little plastic tube, but more about that in an upcoming video. I'm sorry about the framing of this shot, but it's pretty cramped back here, and with me and the epoxy and my tools back here, there just is not a lot of room for cameras. And here it is, all tapped in place. A bit of sanding and some paint, and that will look like $1,000,000. Well, there's not a lot more I can do in there for now, but it's only 2 o'clock, so I've got another couple of hours until I need to start rendering this video. So what should we do? I was planning on painting the inside of the engine compartment this weekend, but I think it makes a lot of sense to just hold off on that until the tiny shelf in there is also ready to be painted. And also there is another reason I can't paint in there this weekend. See that little streak there? That's water, and I'm guessing it's draining from one of the lockers underneath the bunk in the aft cabin, but I'll certainly have to get that dealt with before I start painting. Unfortunately, that bunk is hiding underneath all of that junk.
Ah, that's good. There's not really anything in here. I'm guessing it's just one of the hoses that are on top of me that had some water in it.
It actually looks like it's pretty decent weather out, so why don't we pop down, open up the rudder and check on the foam core. And here she lies. Now I'm expecting the foam core in there to be soaking wet. For one, it's a 30-year-old rudder, they're usually wet, and also there are some repairs down there in the corner. So let's open it up and take a look. I have no idea where the tanks that are located in here that connect to the rudder shaft are going to be located, so let's just try and open up an area and take a look. Now, I don't want to go too far this way, and I don't want to go too far that way, so maybe just a section like this. Ah, that is funny. This stuff, it's kind of like sand. It looks more like concrete than any kind of foam core. The skin did not want to separate from whatever this stuff is, so I had to make this cut to get in there. And seeing as I've already opened this up, I might as well just expand that a little bit so that we can get a look at what's going on in there. If there was ever a time for you guys to chime in with your opinion, I think that time is now. I have no idea what this is. I mean, I know normally for rudders you use a high density foam like that kind of resembles concrete in some regards, but this stuff, yeah, I don't know. Maybe this core material is why I got those high moisture readings off of this last year, but yeah, it feels damp in there. See, this stuff, I swear, that looks like some kind of sand in something, but funny. I don't do this for a living, but I have seen the inside of quite a few rudders over the years, and none of them have had this stuff inside of them, so I think this is going to require a bit of investigation. I've wrapped the rudder in plastic and I'm just going to leave it there for now. I've tilted it slightly so that water will run off of it instead of into it. You gotta love fixing up an old boat. You certainly learn a lot of new stuff, and that's really cool. Now I'm very excited to figure out what that material inside the rudder is, so if you've got a suggestion, please go ahead and leave it as a comment down below. I'm gonna spend the rest of the day while this video renders just tidying up here aboard Athena because she desperately needs it. Before ending this video, let me just mention that the meetup in LA on March 18 is still very much a go. Ava and I are trying to find a venue or somewhere where we can meet up, and as soon as I've got some more details, I will let you know in one of the upcoming videos. But it is going to be in or around LA on March 18, most likely in the afternoon. That's all the details I've got right now, but more about that in an upcoming video. This actually worked out quite well. I think that rudder is an excellent cliffhanger for next weekend's video. But yeah, that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!